Just feel like you start recording session. See us looking. Sorry, okay.
Can I get a light here? Good morning, everybody. Please take your seats. It's just a little bit after 10, so we'll get started here. Good morning again. Please take your seats. Just a couple more people. This is a nice room this morning. Okay, welcome everybody. Would you just remember kindly to silence your cell phones right now? You won't have that disruption. So I want to welcome everybody. I don't know if you know this or not, but this is our 20th year of book club. This book club has been around for 20 years. So it started as, I've been told, a small group of ladies, and it has blossomed into a group of, we had 200 plus last year. So what an amazing accomplishment. Kathy, how many do we have now, members? Do you know? I think let's say that. No?
That's true.
150? 150 members now. So from a small group to 150, that's wonderful. So I certainly never envisioned having a book club like we're having today. The pandemic has changed all of our lives in so many ways, but here we are. I'm very happy that you're all here, and whoever is online, I'm happy that I can't see you, but hopefully you can see us really well. So the book board, we are going to have a wonderful year. We have a wonderful book board, and they work really, really hard to make this as enjoyable as we possibly can under our circumstances. So I'd like to just quickly introduce everybody. Robin Pavia is our vice president, and Elaine Hill is our secretary, she's not here. She's in Nebraska, not here yet. Kathy Tyberski is our treasurer. She's sitting in the back there. Carol Henry is our membership communications person, who I could not live without in his job. Past president Dot Graziano, she's here too. And charities, we have Aileen Leiden, and she's here. I saw Aileen. And Jean Fletcher is not here. She's still on Cape Cod. And Suzanne Flynn is our newest member of the charity board, and she's going to represent Grace Place this year. I thank you all. We're going to start the meeting now, and we usually start with the secretary reading of the minutes. However, they are posted on the window here as you come in on the door. So if anybody would like to read them, but we do need somebody to say that they're good as they are posted. Okay, Robin did, and that's fine. So we are going to have a book sale this year, a little bit different than what we've ever done before, but I think it's going to be very enjoyable for everybody. We have two great co-chairs, Kathy Rushak and Joan Boger, and it's going to be a book stroll. So you're going to be strolling in one particular neighborhood in garages. And Kathy will be here next month, and she'll get into the details, and she'll want some committees signed up. And so it'll be, I think, an enjoyable event. We want you to walk or bike, however, just to get there. The next thing is our charities. I think you all got this in a message from us about Naples Park Elementary School. They are in dire need of some new books. So they are having a virtual book sale. And they sent us an email asking us if we could help them. So if you could do that, go on to the site that they have and do whatever you can to help them out. It's a wonderful school down on Immokalee Road, and many of us have been there and been to lots of their events. And they're just really a very nice school. So I think that's the end of the business, girls. So I think we'll get onto the program, and Robin is going to introduce our first reviewer for the day, and then I'll be back.
Oh, that feels good. Good morning, everyone. We are lucky to have two very unique and interesting books being reviewed today. And the first one is by my husband, Tony Pavia. Did you ever think I'd be introducing you to something, Tony? You never know what I might be.
Right.
Anyhow, and then the second one will be by Sarah Drogan. I'll give you a little information on Tony. Tony was a teacher and administrator in Lower Fairfield County, Connecticut for over 38 years. He served as principal of Stanford High School, Trinity Catholic High School, and for 9 years served as the principal of New Canaan High School. Before becoming a principal, he was an assistant principal, dean of students, and a teacher at Darien High School. Tony began his teaching career in 1977 at West Hill High School, and then went on to the other positions. In 1990, he was the recipient of the Connecticut Celebration of Excellence Award for Teachers. In 1992, he began an oral history project interviewing local World War II veterans, which culminated in his first book, An American Town Goes to War, published by Turner Publishing. in 1995. In 1915, after his retirement, Tony and our son Matt began working on a book chronicling the experiences of the citizens in one city, Stamford, Connecticut, during the Vietnam War. The book, An American Town in the Vietnam War, was published in 2018 and includes a collection of oral histories, third-person narratives, combat and home front stories, and biographies of 29 local men who were killed in Vietnam. Tony's been the recipient of many awards, both on the local and state level. We live here in Rayburn for most of the year, and we do go back home in Connecticut, where we have 3 sons, Matthew, Robert, and Jason, a lovely daughter-in-law, Lisa, a soon-to-be daughter-in-law, Jessica, and 2 grandchildren, Molly Rose and Jack. So Tony will be discussing An American Town in the Vietnam War by Tony Pavia and Matthew Pavia.
Thank you very much for having me. First of all, I wasn't around in 2015. Secondly, if I don't do this, I'm in big trouble. I have to get this out. I did start at Westall High School. My first boss was Vincent Falcone, and I have to say this, and I haven't been paid, just been threatened. I owe him everything. Thank you for having me. This book has the same premise as the first book. In 1995, finally, I completed a 5 or 6 year project of interviewing World War II veterans in the veterans halls and darkened living rooms, very often with my little son Matt with me. The premise of that book was, if you go around any town, well, all of you were baby boomers, most of your baby boomers, all of your parents were in World War II, all your uncles, everybody. And so it always said, what if you walk around any one town and really talked about what everyone did? Who are these people? They're walking around, we see them every day, we don't know what they were involved in one of the great historical incidents in history. So anyway, that was the premise of the book. My son Matt, as I said, accompanied me. He heard about the Bataan Death March from a survivor, D-Day, Iwo Jima. And so in 2015, no, not in 2015, and a little earlier than that, he approached me and said, Dad, let's do one on Vietnam. And I said, Matt, I'm just too old to transcribe interviews and do all that. He said, no, Dad, the technology is easy. We interview them, the computer does it. I said, okay. He lied. That was not true. The technology had not changed. The voice recognition stuff is nonsense. So anyway, we embarked on this long journey, and with the same premise of finding people from our hometown. Thanks, Ben. I'm sorry. Finding people from our hometown and finding out a little bit about them, something that nobody else did. You know, it could be your carpenter, your plumber, it could be a college professor, a lawyer. At any rate, the result was An American Town in the Vietnam War. And I want you, just for later, see that little child in the bottom left corner. If I don't forget, I'll tell you his story. But anyway, same premise, and basically 4 types of stories. Oral histories are the biggest part. We did yearly summaries that caused us to go through the Advocate microfilm. I had sent down here and go through every day of that war and find stories there. We have essays about different things. And we were able to do what I couldn't do with World War II, which is do a biography of each of the men who gave their lives in the war, and that was called The Lives of the Fallen. And that will be the focus of what I talk about today, the lives of the fallen. I'll point out a few, and then I'll try to end with a positive story. 2 things first. Number 1, about Vietnam veterans, I would ask you, everything you've heard or seen, every stereotype, every media, every movie, everything you've seen, every episode of television. I know NCIS does a lot about Vietnam vets who are homeless and things like that. I'd ask you to forget that for a moment. That's a convenient stereotype about the Vietnam War veteran, this tortured soul with PTSD, high rate of homelessness, high rate of drug addiction, largely came back to a country that didn't want them and were not successful. That's not true. That is not true. Homelessness, PTSD, drug addiction, education. The Vietnam veterans are the highest educated, most affluent veterans ever in history. Homelessness, drug addiction, that's simply not true. Those numbers are the same as the general public. As far as this reluctant warrior stuff, you should know this. World War II, 70% were drafted, 30% enlisted. In the Vietnam War, flipped that. 30% were drafted, 70% enlisted. So there is an essay in there shattering the myth. I have to say that at first. Many of these people are wonderfully successful. This is not to say that there wasn't PTSD and there aren't nightmares. It's not to say that. It's just to say that it is the same or less than the general public. And frankly, no different than the World War II veterans that I talked to. Many of them still had nightmares. Their wives sometimes would follow me to the door and say, thank you. You talked about this, and they would tell me, a story about the troubles they had later. So I have to say that. Number two, a little bit about Stamford, Connecticut, veteran community to New York City. Sometimes a collection of famous people were there, literary people in the 20s and 30s. This Algonquin round table of intellects and literary people hung around Stamford. Quite a few great athletes. Jackie Robinson, Hall of Fame. Andy Robustelli, Hall of Fame. The first commissioner of the NBA, J. Walter Kennedy, was mayor of Stanford. Hogan's Heroes, Bob Crane graduated Stanford High School. The Barefoot Contessa graduated Ripplewam High School. Chris Noth from the Good Wife and Law and Order. They were all raised at Stanford. I could go on. But it is today a vibrant city that has seemed to escape the fate of other big cities in Connecticut. It's a very affluent, also with city problems, but very vibrant city. Okay, having said that, I do want to talk about some of the stories, the lives of the fallen that we ran into, because this was a very emotional part for Matt and I. When we finished this section, we both simultaneously looked at each other and said, Dad, we're going to miss these people. We miss them. They became really part of our family. So I'll give you sort of a thumbnail sketch of some of them. The first one, these are three 19-year-old boys who died in the first year of the war. Norman Spinard is in the middle, Billy Mitchell, and Richie Broadhurst, all 19 years old, all died the first year. The first one, Richie Broadhurst and Norman Spinard, were born the same day, 5 feet apart, in Stanford Hospital. The same day, New Year's Day, 1946. Billy Mitchell was the youngest to die from Stanford. He was barely 19 years old. He was also there the least amount of time. He was there 13 days. He was an orphan. This is a terribly tragic story. He was an orphan. He ended up separated from his family. He went to Vietnam. Like many did, there was a couple of orphans in this group. Wanted that camaraderie. In October of 1965, he woke up and he couldn't find his St. Christopher medal. He was panic stricken over it. He thought it was a terrible omen. That day, they're entering a deserted village, and he was killed by an explosive device. We found his sister. I found his sister in Maine. I talked to her. She was his younger sister. She said he was a beautiful big brother to me. Loved him. We were separated. We were spread out. 12 children taken away from the mother. She said on the morning he died, I woke up inexplicably sobbing. And then later in the day, I find out that he died. Just a couple of weeks ago, this is sort of the story goes on. We get a phone call from a woman who was sort of Billy Mitchell's foster sister. They were in a foster home together. And she sent us letters from him. And I just can't tell you what that meant to Matt and I reading those letters. But it turned out he had a lovely girlfriend. They planned on getting married. Heidi, she was the one who gave him St. Christopher Medal. Okay, Ben. The middle one, Norman Spinard, and this man, Mike Harding, were best friends. They grew up in a neighborhood in Springdale, in Stamford. They were literally in adjoining houses. They did everything together. They were joined at the hip. Norman was character. He used to walk squirrels on leashes. He would train squirrels. And he would do his paper route, knock at the door, and he'd have a squirrel. And he was quite a character. Well, these two guys were inseparable. They both joined the service. Mike Harding ends up in the Navy. Norman Spinard ends up in the Marines. This is incredible, but in 1965, Norman Spinard is stationed on the Valley Forge, where they're launching these search and destroy missions by helicopter. Mike Harding is on the Valley Forge. So these best friends spend about a month together on the Valley Forge. They have coffee together every morning. One morning, Mike Harding woke up early, about 5 o'clock in the morning. He helped Norman pack his bags. And Norman said, I'll see you later. And off Norman went, and he was killed that day, 1965. Mike Harding still, when we interviewed him, could barely talk about this. He was still moved 50 years later with Norman Spinard. So, again, 19 years old. I'm sorry, Ben. Of all the ones, the young men from Stanford who were killed, a few were missing in action. First was Stuart Andrews, Yale. How's that for a stereotype? He graduated Yale. He was a pilot. He's about to come home. He's flying a reconnaissance mission. He's shot down. He's missing. They don't find him until 2002. 2002. Richard Rich was the oldest, 41 years old, Harvard, Yale, had 4 boys, was in a high speed, he was shot down. It was a high speed crash. They never found Richard Rich. His family pushed the case. They found him in 2000. He's buried in Arlington. Alphonse Bankowski, if you go to the Vietnam Memorial, which is done in chronological order, is on panel 1, number 3 on the Vietnam Wall. He's the 3rd name on the Vietnam Wall. He was killed in 1961 in Laos. Now, that's outside the years of the war. When they decided Vietnam casualties, they went back to 1960. Alphonse Bankowski was on his way to R&R. He was radioed. Could you just check? One, we think there's an enemy encampment. Could you check it? Flies over, he's shot down in 1961. His niece, who we talked to, who adored him and loved him, said she got a call in 2004. Could she supply mitochondrial DNA, female, so that they got DNA from her and her cousin, she and her cousin, and in 2005, almost 50 years after he was shot down, Alphonse Bankowski was identified. Ben. William Nickerson, Dartmouth, and the stereotype. They have still not found him. He flew off the Kitty Hawk and he was never found again. They still have not identified his remains, but they won't stop trying. Bobby, look, I put Bobby up there because I just wanted you to see his face. He was a professional musician. He graduated from the University of Connecticut with a degree in economics. He was a helicopter pilot. He was married. He volunteered for a mission to save a downed pilot. He was recovering from his appendix being, you know what that's like. He didn't have to go. He went on that mission. He was shot down. His daughter was born the next day. Oh my God. Anthony Pellegrino saved the neighbors from bullies. Everybody we talked to, he saved them from bullies. We finally found his brother who was sobbing. And I said, we hear that we saw it written several places he used to protect kids from bullies. He said, you'll never believe this. I was in the bank a few weeks ago. A guy walks up to me and he said, Pellegrino. I said, yeah. He said, your brother saved my life at Stanford High School. Every day the bullies were after me. He protected me. Oh my God. Alfred Kaspol is an East German. His parents were physicists. The Soviets were hunting them down because, as you know, after the war, they wanted rocket scientists and physicists. They escape in the middle of the night. They come to Stamford, Connecticut. Both parents worked for CBS Labs, which was a high-tech plant. They invented the color television set there. Alfred Kaspol is as American as the flag. He joins the Marines. He is killed. We'll go on. I'll get back to this. Is a tragic. Charles Richards, an orphan. We couldn't find him anywhere. Couldn't find any trace of him. But he's on the Vietnam Wall and he's on the Stanford Memorial Wall. We finally found out that his parents floated between Stanford and Norwalk. His father was 67. His mother was 38 years old. His nearest sibling was 7 years old. Most of his siblings were in their 20s. Matt finds the sister-in-law. Matt was really good at doing this. He finds the sister-in-law, goes to her house. She tells him this tragic story, how he was lost for years. They couldn't find him. Finally, one of the brothers comes in and said, we think Charles is in Stanford at the Hotel Hazleton. That was a boarding house. June will remember the Hotel Hazleton on 7th Street. And he was there. They found him. They readopted him. They already had children. His older siblings already had children. He told him he was joining the Marines. He pulled his sister-in-law aside and said, look, someday somebody might come to the door. I have to tell you this story, and that'll mean something happened to me. He goes on it. He went on a camping trip with them right before he left. The sister-in-law said, we'll never lose you again. He goes to Vietnam. He's killed. It was just a terrible story, just as he found his family. As Matt is leaving their house, his sister-in-law said, Matt, come here. She brings him to the closet. She opens the door. His uniform was still there. This is magic. This is Eugene Mansell. We couldn't find him either. He was missing from our local wall. We found him 12 children. Quite a character. They called him magic because he could do anything. We just couldn't find him anywhere. And then we stumbled across transcripts of these interviews about a debacle in Vietnam where a unit was completely wiped out. That's where we found what happened to Eugene Mansell. They sent a helicopter into a very hot area where just 3 weeks prior, Americans were massacred. They send these young kids in there. They get off the helicopter. Every single person in that platoon was killed or wounded, including the medic, the commander, and Eugene, who got off and yelled to his friends, is everybody okay? And they were sheltered, and then moments later, he said, I was hit. So we did find his family there in Hartford. We had his name added to the wall downtown, and his 90-year-old mother was able to attend. It was quite a touching moment. We're still in touch with his sister. Do you recognize that person? That's Jackie Robinson, the only number in Major League Baseball that is retired. He broke the color barrier in baseball, lived in Stanford. Believe it or not, Carly Simon's father, who was the head of Simon & Schuster, found him a house in Stanford. He couldn't find housing. He played for the Brooklyn Dodgers. He couldn't find housing. They found him a big, beautiful plot in Stanford. It was the main part of Stanford. His son, Jackie, who you see there, in 1969, big blaring headlines, Jackie Robinson Jr. arrested for drugs. Tragic story with people saying, yeah, of course, same old story, big athlete, the kids go back. Well, Jackie Robinson, there's a lot more to the story. Jackie Robinson, was his character, held a press conference. He and his wife said, this is our fault. We take responsibility. We'll fix this kid. He's had a tough life living up to me. And the other part of the story. Jackie Robinson was in the United States Army, was a highly decorated Vietnam veteran. At one point, his best friend, he's dragging his best friend is hit and killed. So he came home, he had all sorts of problems. And one of them was drugs. So in 1969, he was busted. And it was a huge embarrassment, I suppose, to the family. Except that nobody knows the end of the story. He straightened his act out, he cleaned out. He was a vigorous proponent for veterans with drug problems. He's called to testify in front of Congress. As a result of his testimony, Richard Nixon signs a bill offering aid and treatment to drug addicts who had problems in Vietnam. So he's working for a rehabilitation agency in upstate Connecticut. He's raising money for him. One night he's driving home late, he crashes on the Merritt Parkway and is killed. So he is a casualty of Vietnam in many ways, although he didn't die there. Paul Rudersham, you've heard of Agent Orange. Paul Rudersham insisted when he came home that poisoned him. Nobody knew what that stuff was. He fought and fought and fought. He testified in front of Congress. In his testimony, he said, I was killed in Vietnam and I never knew about it. He fought, he filed a major lawsuit on behalf of thousands of plaintiffs. And in 1978, he files the suit. In 1982, he wins that suit on behalf of everyone who was contaminated with Agent Orange because of Paul Rudersham. He did not get to see it. He died in 1978 in Stamford, Connecticut. He is the basis behind the Agent Orange relief that the government is providing. Well, I don't know if I have time for this. The first PTSD case was Stamford, Connecticut. Another man who wasn't killed in Vietnam on the left is Richie Flaherty, 4'10". He had to fight to get into the military, 4'10". Senator Dodd writes him a letter, he gets in the military. He's highly decorated in his first tour of duty. He wants to now be a Green Beret. He gets a letter again from Chris Dodd. He's a Green Beret. He's awarded the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, several Purple Hearts. He comes home. It was a terrible story. He was homeless. He lived in Florida, right outside of Orlando. He lived in a Publix parking lot. People knew him there. The police knew him there. In 2015, in May, he's killed in a hit and run. They caught the woman. She never served a day, even though she left the scene of the crime. The police that knew him well, he gave the police a key to a storage locker. They went to a storage locker and they found very strange things. They found a passport that was stamped all over the world recently. He was doing something. We don't know what he was doing. And he would hint at this to the police. He would hint, I'm working for the CIA, he was homeless. So he died. They gave him a full military burial. We really still don't know what Richie Flaherty did. I did find a court case in Delaware where he testified for the U.S. government in case against some guys who were smuggling weapons. That's all we know about him. He insisted on being buried near a woman who we don't know who she was. So the many mysteries of Richie Flaherty we'll never know. That last story, how much time? I'm going to leave you on a positive note. 1975 was the second end of the Vietnam War. The North Vietnamese broke the armistice. They're literally flooding down into South Vietnam. People are escaping, boat people, etc. There was a problem. There were a lot of orphans there who had American fathers, Amerasian children. They would have no chance under the North Vietnamese administration. They'd have no chance. So Americans began sending planes in. I used to show my students a film of Murray Fromson from CBS saying, this is a victory over red tape. They load a plane full of these orphans. Moments later, Murray Fromson comes on and he says, where will this misery end? Plane takes off and crashes with the orphans. 100+ live. Enter Bob Macaulay on the left. Quite a character. He worked, he was a philanthropist. He worked for orphans. Ultimately, the founder of AmeriCares. Bob Macaulay goes to the bank. He says, I want a plane. I want it filled with fuel. We're getting those kids. He said, well, what are you going to do? He put his house up. He remortgaged his house. He sent a plane there. It lands in the United States. Lands in California. Hugh Hefner loans him another plane. So the kids are all loaded on a Playboy plane. The Playboy plane lands at JFK Airport, right next to the Pope, who just landed at So there's this scene, and there are pictures in the Daily News of the Pope, and then the Playboy plane with Playboy bunnies carrying babies out of the plane. So and enter Rita Romano, just a beautiful, wonderful, wonderful woman. She and her husband Joe worked with orphans. She gets a phone call, get your house ready. There's 50 kids coming. So literally, there's a bus headed from JFK. She has 8 children. 8 children. She sends her 8 children out. She just brought a new dining room furniture. They empty that out of the house. They empty the house. The 50 cribs come in. She brings them to Stanford Catholic High School. The track team comes in. They build the cribs. And for 2 weeks, Rita nurses these 45 to 50 orphans in her home. People knocking at the door, dropping off diapers, dropping off those strangers. Mr. Ribnick, who used to be our garbage man, shows up at the door. He's emptying the garbage every day. I'll take the garbage, all these diapers, everything. 50 kids. So finally, they find every single one of these kids a home. And Rita gets to deliver the last one to Boston, where the new father of this child is on Broadway, performing in The King and I, and that was Yul Brynner. So she delivers the last child to Yul Brynner, and one, by the way, with Julie Andrews. And so Rita's children all returned to the house. She ended up adopting a child of herself, so she had 9 children. She and Joe became great philanthropists in the city of Stanford. Joe passed away. She's a wonderful woman. She's still a giving, caring woman who is quite a figure in Stanford, Connecticut. In terms of that little boy you saw on the cover of the book, we flash ahead to 1990. I'm teaching this. The fall of Vietnam. Taught a modern America course. I show them the film of the plane taking off. Class ends. Chris Nakian comes from the back of the room. Said, Mr. Pavia, and he holds up, and he's got a newspaper with his picture and his mother who adopted him. He was one of those children. So it's just quite a strange world Chris is living in. We interviewed him. He's married. He has a wonderful life. He's living in Ohio, and he thanks God every day that he was taken to this country. So that's it. I thank you very much for your attention. I hope
Does anybody have any questions? You can come up to the mic.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's not a question. I think it's not. So touched by this book. I'm going to cry. Thank you for shedding light on the Vietnam War veterans and the people that were brave enough to sign up and go, not be drafted. I mean, the way you talked about that was amazing. Our father's generation was always called the greatest generation, but these men don't get credit. Thank you.
Thank you. May I say one thing? I just have to say one thing. A few years ago, I played the President's Cup against a guy who just completely demolished me. And normally I'd be ticked off, but it was Rick Janelle. And I was proud of it. Rick Janelle, I have to mention, I got to know him down here. And he was just a wonderful man and a wonderful patriot. And I'm sorry, I just felt I had to mention it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Our next book, which is an absolutely fascinating book, is going to be presented by Sarah Drogan. And the name of the book is, I hope I'm saying this right, Paragon, which I had to look up in the dictionary to find out what that meant. But, so Sarah is with us today, and she taught high school history at the Wheeler School in Providence, Rhode Island for many years, followed by several years of adjunct teaching at Rhode Island College. She's written a book. It's called Spare Me the Details, A Short History of Western Civilization. Sarah enjoys reading, writing, photography, and her daily walks. She wishes we could include golf in this list, but the game continues to be a struggle. I get it. Sarah is married to Jeff Drogan, and they've been Stonebridge residents since 2016. Sarah and Jeff have 2 children, a son in Los Angeles and a daughter in Denver, as well as 3 granddaughters in Denver. So I present Sarah Drogan.
Thank you, everybody. I just have to add, Tony, as a high school history teacher, I had my students do oral histories on World War II, and it was fascinating. Who knew that they were building airstrips in the Aleutian Islands, or that we had men in the Caribbean looking for aircraft and submarines? And even at the end of the year, the class would remember some of these stories. And of course, as my teaching went on, it became increasingly more difficult to locate World War II veterans. So good morning. A paragon is a shape with an infinite but countable number of sides. A paragon is also the title of Colin McCann's 2020 novel. He calls this a hybrid novel. It's a novel that has many different facets to it and that merges fiction with nonfiction. The book received very favorable reviews. It was long listed for Britain's esteemed Booker Prize 2020, and closer to home, it was one of Elaine Newton's summer reading choices. Colin McCann is a 55-year-old Irish-born author. His 2 most famous works are the 2009 novel, Let the Great World Spin, which won our National Book Award, and his 2013 novel, Transatlantic, which again, closer to home, Elaine Newton lectured on probably in 2014. In addition to our National Book Award, he's won quite a few prizes. He's won the Irish Novel of the Year Award, the International Dublin Literary Award, Guggenheim Fellowship, and so forth. He studied journalism post-high school in Ireland, and by age 21 had his own byline working for the Irish Press Group. But at that same age, 21, which was 1986, he came to our country. He spent 2 years bicycling across our country, ended up in Texas, enrolled in the University of Texas at Austin, graduated Phi Beta Kappa, started writing, got married. He and his wife lived in Japan briefly, then returned to our country. They live in New York City with their 3 children, and he teaches in the Master of Fine Arts Creative Writing program at Hunter College. McCann believes strongly in the power of sharing stories, personal as well as fictional. And to this end, he recently founded a group called Narrative 4, which seeks to have young people share their stories with other young people around the world. He believes that this will help generate empathy, a quality that seems sorely missing at times. And I think, as you'll see, A Paragon is also a work that seeks to generate empathy, as we can identify very strongly with the 2 main characters. So, okay, not quite yet, but that's fun. I'm always been interested, and you might too, in what elements of a novel most compel a writer of fiction. Last year, I led a discussion on Ann Tyler for Brayburn, and she contends that for her, it's all about character. She doesn't concern herself with plot because the characters define the action of the work as they move through it. I think other authors, Dan Brown, for example, of the Da Vinci Code, writers of mystery and suspense, it's got to be about the action, the plot for them. It's a paramount concern. There's writers who use their novels as a vehicle to impart some sort of a message to us. If you've read the 2019 Pulitzer-winning novel, The Overstory, Richard Powers really brings home the message. Trees have lives of their own. Trees are sacred. But McCann contends for him, it's about words. Here's what he says. I'm not denying the existence or necessity of plot. I'm just saying that good plot will emerge from good language. It's the words that matter. The words push the characters along. They find a rhythm, and the rhythm then discovers the plot. Sometimes, as in life, nothing happens, but sometimes nothing happens beautifully. That's the writer I want to read. He also contends that the best writers become alternative historians. He says that he learned about the Great Depression through the writings of E.L. Doctorow, that the writings of James Joyce and Ulysses gave him a sense of what Dublin was like at the turn of the 20th century. And you'll see that he becomes one of these alternative historians himself in this work, looking at Arab-Israeli relations through a kaleidoscope sort of storytelling. He also asserts this. I think it is our job as writers to be epic, tiny and epic at the same time. If you're going to be a fiction writer, why not take on something that's important? In doing this, you must understand that sometimes it is the tiny story within that epic structure that is possibly the most important. So Ben. So a paragon, this prismatic look at Israeli-Palestinian relations, is epic in structure, but the kernel of this is the small story, albeit a very important and moving one, of the unexpected, profound relationship between Bassam Aramin, a Palestinian, and Rami El-Hanan, an Israeli. And Bassam is the younger man who is closer to the window. They're brought together through an organization called Combatants for Peace, founded by Bassam, in which Rami later joins, a group comprised of both Palestinians and Israelis who work for peace. But what really cements their relationship is the death of their daughters 10 years apart. Okay, Ben. Rami's daughter, Smatter, age 13, was turned into a scattered human jigsaw puzzle, as McCann describes her death, by some Palestinian suicide bombers. And then Abir, Bassam's daughter, age 10, was killed by a young Israeli soldier's rubber bullet. McCann describes these men and the deaths of their daughters in numerous chapters that thread throughout this book, each time offering us a fresh perspective, a new bit of information, another facet of this story. His book is comprised of 1,001 chapters, a nod, of course, to 1,001 Tales of the Arabian Nights. But I will hasten to add that some of the chapters are a photograph, a single sentence, or, Ben, a blank rectangle, as if to suggest no words are possible, only a void. Okay, Ben? So back to this slide. Rami, the Israeli, is age 67. He served the mandatory 1 year of service in the Israeli army. He fought in the 1973 Sinai War and lost several close friends. He left the army only wanting what he called a normal Israeli life, a quiet life. He married, he became a successful graphic designer, had 3 sons, and then his daughter Smador, the princess as he calls her. In 1997, he lost his daughter, as I said, to some Palestinian suicide bombers. His first thought was of revenge, but then as time passed, he asked himself, will killing bring back my daughter? She is not coming back, your Smadari. So in a very gradual, complicated way, you come over to the other side. You start asking why. What could cause someone to be that angry, that desperate, that hopeless, that stupid, that he is willing to blow himself up alongside a 13-year-old girl? Rami seeks to understand the other side. Bassam Aramin, the Arab Palestinian, 48 years old, was incarcerated in an Israeli prison for 7 years, beginning at age 17, for throwing 2 defused grenades at some Israeli jeeps. He spent 7 years in prison, and despite the harshness of his captivity, he wanted to learn about his captors. He mastered Hebrew by listening to TV. From Holocaust denier, he became a Holocaust believer. Released from prison at age 9 in 1992, he marries immediately, has 7 children, founds Combatants for Peace. And at one point, when he is in his 30s, he and his family spend some time in England, where he can study Holocaust archives. Then, in 2007, as a 10-year-old daughter, Abir, walked through her school gates, having just been to a candy shop, she was inexplicably shot in the back of her head by a member of the Israeli border police, by an 18-year-old. The medical clinics that were local were unable to tend to her head wound, and Bassam cradled his daughter for hours as they waited to get across the border into Israel, where someone could offer her assistance. It was too late by the time they got there. This tragedy could have filled him with bitterness and with hatred, but it didn't. So joined together by their mutual tragedies, as you can see, they traveled the world together, giving talks, urging peace. And of course, the major challenge for these men, how to keep this story fresh. So here's how McCann describes Rami's efforts. The atoms of his story pressed against one another, the force of what he wanted to say. There were times he felt he was standing outside of himself, hovering, watching himself, but it didn't matter. He connected with the words now. They were his. He owned them. They were spoken for a purpose. He wanted to waken the sleep in his listeners, to see a jolt in them, just for a second, to see an eye open or a lifted eyebrow. That was enough. A crack in the wall, he said. It sometimes surprised Rami that he could reach so far inside, he could discover new ways of saying the same thing. He was, he knew, making smarter, continually present. It slid something sharp and burning into his rib cage, pried him further open. Once or twice at the lectures, he looked across to see the surprise on Bassam's face, as if the new phrase had just sliced him open too. So I wanted to read that extended passage for you so you could hear the beautiful and moving quality of McCann's writing, since we know how important words are to him. But a paragon, as you might have guessed from the title, is far more than the story of Bassam and Rami. It contains a plethora of interesting information, or facets or sides, if you will. It's as if McCann has taken a lifetime of interest in arcane information and woven it into this book. And I thought to myself, as I read this, if I aspired to go on Jeopardy, this would be a very good book to read. You'll learn, for example, about ex-president of France, Francois Mitterrand's last meal of ortolan and the conventions associated with eating this tiny bird. In fact, birds, their flight formations, different kinds of birds, how to capture them, trickle throughout or percolate throughout this book. And you can see birds are on the cover of the book. Why? Well, I believe it's because birds don't recognize borders. They fly over boundaries. And one of the points of this book is that borders can be a curse to both parties on either side of the border. You will learn in the course of several chapters about Philippe Petit's high wire walk from Israeli Jerusalem across the Valley of Hell to the Palestine side. He called this the Walk of Peace. It was his longest walk ever, a walk that transcended borders. And this is the same Philippe Petit, that is quite a tongue twister, who appears in Let the Great World Spin, his 1974 high wire walk between the Twin Towers. You'll also read a description that weaves through several chapters of composer John Cage's experimental work, 4-3-3, in which the musicians are told to remain silent for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Silence emphasizes aloneness. Silence lets us become aware of what is around us. Silence can be anticipatory for sound. I think this relates to a point in the book when Rami, seeing his daughter after the bomb explosion, said, the door closed with a vacuum hiss, then silence. He knew even then that all subsequent sounds would derive from this silence. So what is McCann's point in including all of this seemingly random information? It's about connection, and connection is one of McCann's major themes. If you think of Let the Great World Spin, set in New York City, the characters' lives brush against each other, either directly or tangentially, and Philippe Petit's back walk is the connecting motif among all of these characters. They're all part of the paragon of New York City. In Transatlantic, most of the characters somehow are related over a 150-year span. By including such a myriad of topics, McCann suggests that everything and everyone is connected. We are all facets of an paragon. A statement that comes late in the book says, survival, in fact, is about seeing the connection between things. And certainly empathy is about seeing the connection between people. So 2 points I'd like to make. First, this is a very long work, and I think you can get a sense of its richness just from reading some of it, 50 pages. And I also know some of you might be thinking, well, why should I read the book? I know what happens now, but I really haven't revealed any more than what you will come across on the book jacket or in a summary of the book. The reason to read the book is for the unique way in which McCann has assembled it, the beauty of the language, and really the overarching message of hope. Yes, hope. As Rami contends, you never heal. Don't let anyone tell you that you ever fully heal. I pay the price. Sometimes I despair. But what else is there in the end but to be hopeful? As the psalmist says, I don't have time for hate anymore. We need to learn from our pain, invest in our peace, not in our blood. If these two men, sworn enemies, two men who have both lost daughters to the enemy, can put aside these hatreds and forge a deep connection, a profound and lasting friendship, well, there's hope for all of us. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions?
Wow, that's all I can say, guys. What wonderful reviews from both of you today. So I thank everybody for coming, both in person. I think we have 39 to 40 people in the room. Yes, and hopefully we'll have that many on virtual.
36 on virtual.
36, we did better than last month. Great, everybody. So next month, the meeting is December 4th, and Maureen Janelle, there you are. Maureen Janelle is presenting Sue Monk Kidd's new book called The Book of Longings. Now, we've seen, we've heard about Sue Monk Kidd a few times. Maureen has presented her book, and she has also been here twice as our author. So it should be a very, very nice discussion. So hope to see you all again. Thank you.